The sun was dipping low over the horizon, staining the dusty sky a deep burnt orange, when I pulled into the driveway of my own home, or at least, the house I thought was mine. My shift at the clinic had ended earlier than expected, and I was feeling a quiet sense of relief. My feet ached, my shoulders were stiff, but the thought of surprising my husband, Daniel, with his favorite coconut rice dinner made me smile. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air was thick with laughter, loud, unrestrained laughter. It was the kind of laughter that makes you pause, because it sounds too intimate, too conspiratorial. I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the doorframe, listening. And then I heard my sister's voice. Miriam. Oh my God, can you believe she actually thought you married her for love? Ha! My heart stuttered. Daniel's deep chuckle followed. You have to admit, it's impressive how naive she is. Always trusting, always handing over her paychecks without question. She has no idea she's just funding our little adventures. For a moment, the words didn't register. They floated around me like smoke, finding every crack in my heart to seep into. Adventures? Funding? My mind was spinning so fast I felt dizzy. I edged closer, the voices growing clearer with every step. They were in the living room. I could see the back of Daniel's head and Miriam's braid falling over her shoulder as they leaned toward each other on the couch, their faces lit with wicked amusement. On the coffee table, I noticed the bottle of wine I had been saving for our anniversary, already half empty. Miriam slapped her knee, laughing again. And she's so proud of being independent, yet she can't see that you're draining her savings. Honestly, if I were her, I'd die of embarrassment. Daniel smirked. That's why you're smarter than her, Miriam. We see the game for what it is. The blood roared in my ears. My knees felt weak, but my anger kept me standing. Every memory of my sacrifices, working double shifts, skipping meals, sending money to help my sister pay her rent, rushed through me like a storm. I had thought I was building a life with someone who valued me. Instead, I had been the fool in their private comedy. I didn't confront them. Not then. Instead, I stood in the shadows, my hands trembling but my face eerily calm. I watched the way Daniel rested his arm casually across the back of the couch, his fingers grazing Miriam's shoulder. It was subtle, but my stomach churned at the implication. I backed away, my breath shallow, my mind already racing. Confrontation in that moment would only feed them more entertainment, more reason to mock me. I needed to think. I needed to remember that I wasn't just their pawn. When I finally stepped into the kitchen, I deliberately made a noise with the cupboard. Their laughter stopped abruptly, replaced with the low hum of the television. By the time I walked into the living room, Miriam was sitting upright, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and Daniel was leaning back with a casual smile. "You're home early," Daniel said, pretending surprise. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady but cold. "I finished work sooner than expected." Miriam plastered on a grin. "We were just watching a movie." I nodded, saying nothing. The air between us was tight, the kind that made you aware of every blink, every breath. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake beside Daniel, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, feeling the gulf between us stretch into something unbridgeable. My mind kept replaying their words, naive, funding our adventures, smarter than her. Each repetition carved the wound deeper. But somewhere in that long, sleepless night, an idea began to take shape. My late father had left me a small but significant inheritance, land and a modest house in my hometown. I had never touched it, thinking it was safer as a backup for the future. Daniel didn't know the full extent of it, and Miriam had never been told. To them, my salary was all I had. That inheritance was my silent ace. If they saw me as stupid, then perhaps it was time to show them what real foolishness looked like, theirs. For the next week, I played my part. I laughed when Daniel made jokes. I nodded when Miriam called to check in. I made dinner, folded laundry, and carried on as though nothing had changed. All the while, I was making quiet arrangements. I visited my lawyer under the guise of a medical appointment, securing the documents that proved my ownership of the property. I called a trusted family friend in my hometown, asking him to prepare the house for my arrival. I withdrew just enough cash to cover my move without drawing attention. It was strange, almost intoxicating, to move under the cover of their underestimation. They had no idea I was dismantling the life they thought they controlled. The final straw came on a Thursday evening. I had just returned from the clinic when I heard them again in the living room, this time speaking in low, hurried tones. "Once she renews the mortgage, we'll have access to even more," Miriam was saying. Daniel chuckled. "By then, we'll have what we need. She's too busy working to notice anything." Something inside me hardened. I realized that if I stayed one more day, I would lose not just my dignity but also the last of my self-respect. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I packed a single suitcase with my clothes, my important documents, and a few personal items that truly belonged to me. I left my wedding ring on the bedside table, not out of drama, but because it no longer held meaning. By the time Daniel stirred awake, I was gone. I drove for hours, the open road stretching ahead like a promise. The air grew fresher as I left the city behind, the scent of earth and rain replacing the smog. When I reached my father's old house, I stepped inside and felt a strange, quiet peace. The walls were worn, the paint chipped, but it was mine. Every inch of it was free from their mockery, their schemes, their betrayal. I didn't block Daniel's number. I didn't block Miriam's. I wanted them to see me vanish and know they had lost something they couldn't replace. 3 days later, the calls started. First from Daniel, his voice smooth but laced with irritation. "Where are you? Stop acting childish and come home." Then from Miriam, pretending concern. "We're worried about you. Let's talk." I didn't respond. Silence, I realized, was the most powerful language in the world. But as I sat on the veranda one evening, watching the sun dip behind the hills, I knew this wasn't over. People like Daniel and Miriam didn't just let go when their easy source of gain disappeared. They would come. And when they did, I would be ready, not with anger or pleading, but with a truth they couldn't twist. Because they thought they had been laughing at my stupidity. They had no idea I had been quietly preparing to laugh last. It didn't take long for Daniel and Miriam's irritation to turn into desperation. By the second week, their calls had shifted from smooth persuasion to thinly veiled threats. Daniel's voice on the phone was harsher now. "You can't just disappear like this, Ruth. You have responsibilities. Our mortgage, our bills." I hung up before he could finish. Miriam's message came next, long and dripping with false affection. "We're family. Whatever misunderstanding happened, we can sort it out. Don't throw away your marriage over a silly miscommunication." Miscommunication. That was her word for betrayal. I almost laughed. I knew their pattern too well. First the guilt, then the charm, and if those failed, the anger. And sure enough, a few days later, Daniel showed up in my hometown. I saw his car before he saw me, parked near the small roadside shop. He strode toward me with that confident gait I once found reassuring. "Ruth," he said, smiling tightly. "Let's go home." "This is home now," I replied, my voice calm but final. His eyes narrowed. "You're being unreasonable. You can't just abandon everything we built." I tilted my head. "We didn't build anything, Daniel." "I did. And you used it." For a moment, his mask slipped. I saw the flash of irritation, the wounded pride. But then he chuckled, that same laugh I'd overheard in my living room weeks ago. "You'll regret this. You think you can survive without me?" I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the wooden latch sliding into place with a satisfying click. Over the next few days, Miriam began calling the landline of my father's house, since I'd stopped answering my cell. Her tone was sharper now. Do you really want everyone to know you walked out on your marriage for no reason? People will talk, Ruth. But I had learned something important in my silence. People only have the power to hurt you when you give them access. And I had closed every door that led back to them. Still, I wasn't naive enough to think their persistence would fade easily. Daniel wasn't here for love, he was here because he had lost control over something he thought he owned. One evening, just before dusk, I saw them together in town. Miriam's arm brushed Daniel's as they stood at the counter of the grocery shop, pretending to be casual. Their eyes darted around, scanning for me. I stepped into the light, letting them see me. Their smiles froze when I greeted the shopkeeper warmly and ignored them entirely. The shopkeeper, old Mr. Gambo, had known my father for years. He spoke to me like family, his voice carrying across the street. It was a subtle but deliberate statement. I had my own circle here. My own life. And they were no part of it. When I walked away that evening, I could feel their stares burning into my back. I knew the final confrontation was coming. The final confrontation came sooner than I expected. It was a Sunday afternoon, the air heavy with the smell of rain. I was on the veranda, sipping tea, when Daniel and Miriam's car pulled up outside the gate. They didn't even knock, they simply walked in, as though my life was still an open house for their intrusion. Daniel was the first to speak. "We need to talk, Ruth." Miriam stood beside him, her face wearing that familiar blend of arrogance and feigned concern. "You've made your point. But let's be practical. You can't just keep this inheritance to yourself while your marriage collapses. That's selfish." I set my cup down slowly. Selfish? Miriam, I worked for everything you've taken from me, my savings, my trust, my peace. And you both laughed about it. Tell me, what exactly have you given me in return? Miriam's eyes flickered, but she quickly recovered. We're family. Family forgives. Family doesn't conspire to drain you dry, I replied, my voice steady. Daniel stepped forward, his jaw tightening. Fine. If that's how you want to play it, we'll tell everyone you abandoned your home and ran away. You think your precious reputation will survive that? I smiled faintly. Say whatever you want. The truth has a way of surfacing, eventually. But here's something you didn't expect. I've already transferred the property title into a trust. Even if I die tomorrow, neither of you will ever touch a coin from it. They froze. You can't do that, Miriam said, her voice rising. I already have, I said. Because you both taught me something valuable, that not everyone who sits at your table comes to eat with you. Some come to eat you. The rain began to fall, steady and cold. I stood and walked to the door, holding it open for them. You should go before the road floods. Daniel glared at me one last time, but he knew it was over. Miriam avoided my eyes, her face pale beneath her makeup. Without another word, they left. When their car disappeared down the road, I felt something lift from my chest, not joy, exactly, but relief. The kind that comes from finally locking a door that should have been closed a long time ago. Over the weeks that followed, I rebuilt my days. I planted vegetables in the backyard. I reconnected with old friends. I worked at the local clinic, not because I had to, but because it reminded me that my worth came from my own hands, not from anyone else's approval. People in town heard whispers, of course. Some asked questions. But I learned not to fear the murmur of gossip, it fades. What lasts is the quiet knowledge that you chose yourself when it mattered most. I never saw Daniel or Miriam again. But sometimes, late at night, I think of that moment in my old living room, the laughter, the smugness, the certainty that I would always be too blind to see. And I smile. Because they were right about one thing, I was naive. But they forgot that people can outgrow naivety. And when they do, they stop being the punchline. And